Hey, how's it going everyone, and welcome to the channel. Now, I had a plan to make a video discussing my thoughts on the best way to retcon the sequel trilogy, but I decided that I would put that on hold. The reason for this is that I feel I should dive into my thoughts on these movies first, so that you all better understand where I'm coming from when discussing these movies and the retcon. I don't want to come across as just some hater, instead I'd like for you all to understand my reasonings. So, that is what the next few videos are going to be. I'm going to be discussing each individual movie in the sequels and giving my thoughts, good and bad, on each one. Now, obviously that means that today I'm going to be talking about Episode 7, The Force Awakens. So, without further ado, let's hop right into the video. Enjoy. Alright, so first things first, I want to talk about the good in this movie, because there are a lot of positives with this movie. Okay, so I am relatively young, as I am only 20 years old, and what this means is that unfortunately I never got to see a Star Wars movie in theaters growing up. So being the Star Wars fan I am, I got very excited when this movie was announced, as I would finally be able to witness one in all of its glory. Watching it in the theater was incredible, and it gave me an experience I will never forget. Seeing the Millennium Falcon zooming around on the big screen for the first time, for instance, was a very big moment for me. So, positive one is that it reintroduced Star Wars to the world, and for that, I'm thankful. Now on to the positives about the actual movie itself. It was awesome to see Han and Chewie back on screen again. I thought their introduction into the movie was great, and I of course loved the Chewie we're home. All around, I thought Han was really good in this movie. I'm even pretty much okay with killing him, as it showed Kylo was serious about going to the dark side. I mean, Harrison Ford wanted Han to die in Empire, so I'm glad he survived at least until now. Now, his death brings me to my next positive about this movie, and that is Kylo Ren. I actually like Kylo quite a bit. He was menacing, and he seemed to be relatively unstoppable for maybe the first half of the movie. Him stopping the blaster midair was insanely cool. I liked how we got a peek into his mind and saw the conflict within him as he was still being pulled to the light. Him killing Han represented him attempting to purge that light out of him and showed that he chose the path of the dark side. All around, Kylo was probably my favorite part of this movie. Now, on to the next positive, and that is Finn. I really loved how Finn was set up in this movie. The idea of a stormtrooper going rogue was a very intriguing storyline. It was a story we had never really seen in the movies and raised the question, how was he able to go against the brainwashing he had endured since he was a kid? I always thought he was force sensitive and that's how he did it and why Kylo remembered him specifically. So this whole situation set up a very interesting arc that could have went multiple ways. So this positive is that the movie set up a good story for Finn. Overall, it was a pretty entertaining movie and maybe my favorite of the new trilogy. It has other positives, but these are the ones I feel are the most important. So now that we have those out of the way, let's go on to the negatives. Now here we are at the bad parts of this movie. Now, disclaimer, I'm going to talk a lot more about the negatives due to the fact that I feel they require more explaining in order to understand. So, first negative is one that a lot of people discuss when talking about this movie, and that is that it is pretty much a redo of A New Hope. Now, A New Hope is one of the best Star Wars movies ever, so you would think redoing it would produce a great movie as well. Unfortunately for this movie, it lacks a lot of the heart and soul that A New Hope had. The story to me just doesn't feel authentic. It feels as though they weren't making this movie with love and respect for the Star Wars movies, and instead were attempting to use fan service via essentially remaking A New Hope in order to make money, and that comes across to the viewer. Essentially, it lacks heart and really the magic of Star Wars. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is Starkiller Base. I'm sorry, but this is just simply ridiculous. We already had 2 Death Stars in the original trilogy. We didn't need a brand new one. I know they played it off as it being a way bigger threat than those, but honestly, I don't care. It is literally the exact same thing. There were a million other things they could have had as the threat in this movie, but they gave us this. It's ridiculous. Another thing I didn't like about this movie is how Kylo worships Vader's mask. He says, "I will finish what you started, grandfather." But here's the thing, Vader turned back to the light and became Anakin again. So, it doesn't make sense that he is attempting to go bad and be like Vader. Like, what is he attempting to finish? I don't understand. Like, dude, did no one tell you how that story ended? So yeah, I thought that whole thing made absolutely no sense whatsoever. The next negative is more of a nitpick thing maybe, but it's something I believe made the movie suffer a bit. That is the choice to have Kylo remove his helmet so early on in the movie. If they had just waited until he was on that bridge with Han, it would have been a much better and more emotional reveal. Like I said though, it's a nitpick maybe, but I wanted to mention it because I've personally always had a problem with it. Also, I wanted to throw it in there as a buffer because I'm about to dive deep into my main criticisms of this movie. Like, these are the stuff that I generally don't really like at all about this movie. So, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I do not like Rey at all. I never have. I find her character to be really bland and honestly just not relatable at all. This also has nothing to do with her being a woman, so don't use that to undermine my point. The fact that she is so good at everything in this movie, having had no prior training, is maddening. It creates a character who has no opportunity for growth. The reason people love Luke so much isn't because he's so powerful. It's because he started out as this sort of annoying, whiny teenager on Tatooine with no knowledge of the Force whatsoever. When he found out about it, he was naturally gifted in a way, being able to deflect blaster bolts from the training droids. However, this wasn't an impressive feat. This is an exercise that younglings would train with, so it didn't require much knowledge of the Force at all. He went from a place of nothing to a wise Jedi Knight who turned Darth Vader to a light and essentially single-handedly took down the Empire. That is why he is so inspiring. It is the story of the hero's journey, and that is where this movie struggled. Rey had no growth. She was already able to do all she needed to do in this movie, despite never having any training at all. Now, I can excuse flying the Millennium Falcon on Jakku, because maybe she had had some experience piloting that we hadn't seen. But I cannot excuse what happens later in the movie. I am talking about how she is able to resist Kylo from getting in her mind. I know Rey is naturally gifted with the Force, for reasons at this point unknown, but Kylo has trained for years, and is a Skywalker, resulting in him being extremely powerful in the Force. There is simply no way she could have resisted. But that isn't even the worst instance of this. She proceeds to use the Jedi mind trick on a stormtrooper with no training. How did she even know she could do that? How did she know how to do it? She had only found out about the Force itself at the most like a week before this. Like I said, the most Luke did was deflect blaster bolts from the training droid, whereas she literally mind controlled someone in her first attempt at using the Force. It's utterly ridiculous. However, once again, not the worst offense of this. She then later is able to pull a lightsaber across the forest to herself. In Empire, Luke struggled to pull his lightsaber from like 5 feet. The idea that she can do this is once again ridiculous and just stupid. And finally, we have arrived at the worst thing this movie does. Now, I've listed a lot of things Rey has done with no training, so surely that is all she does, right? Wrong. I haven't even mentioned the dumbest and most ridiculous thing she does in this movie. She defeats Kylo in lightsaber combat. Now, I know there are some out there who will try to explain this away and say that it makes sense, but I'm sorry, it just doesn't. There is just no excusing or explaining a way that can make this moment make sense. Kylo trained with Luke for over a decade, and that includes learning lightsaber combat. Rey, prior to this moment, had never even ignited a lightsaber in her life. I know she was good with her staff, but fighting with a staff is a lot different than fighting with a sword, especially a lightsaber. There's just simply no way that she could have defeated Kylo. He had too much training with lightsabers and with the Force itself for her to overcome. I'm sorry, but that is something I cannot let this movie get away with. The third act of this movie, unfortunately, in a way, ruins the rest because of the numerous mistakes and dumb decisions it makes with Rey's character. But I'll be discussing my thoughts on the movie as a whole in a moment. I have one last negative I want to discuss, and that is the lack of Luke in this movie. I'm sorry, but the idea to keep him out of this movie was stupid. He is the reason people came to the theater. We all wanted to see Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie back together once again in this movie, and that is what we expected to see. Instead, this movie robbed us of ever being able to see them all together one final time because Han died and Luke was absent in the movie. He at least should have showed up to fight Kylo and save Rey at the end, and it would have actually made sense. Unfortunately, they kept Luke out of this movie and only showed him at the very end. In my opinion, this was a form of a cash grab. They knew people wanted to see Luke, so they made us think he was in this movie. They even went as far to put him in the trailers and the voiceovers to make us think he was in this movie, so that we would rush to the theater to finally see Jedi Master Luke like we always wanted to, and then they didn't show him until the end. And that was so we would rush to the theater once again for the next movie so we could finally see him. I could be wrong about this, but that is how I feel, in my opinion, on why they did that. That is all I have to say about this, because the next video is going to have a lot of Luke talk in it. So that is going to wrap up the main negatives I have to say about this movie. So yeah, let's go ahead and get to my final thoughts. Alright, so here we are at my final thoughts regarding this movie. Now, based on my positives and negatives, you may assume that I just simply hate this movie, but that is not the case. I actually think this movie is pretty good. It does have a lot of negatives, but they are negatives that one can look past because they don't inherently ruin anything established prior. So I can look past some of the negatives in order to still find this movie to be pretty enjoyable. If this movie was an isolated film, I would still be able to say that I like this movie a lot. However, this is not an isolated movie. It is part of a trilogy, so it must be judged in the context of this trilogy and where it goes. Unfortunately for this movie, a lot of the good was just tossed out of the window in the next movie, which leads The Force Awakens to suffer in my eyes. But more on this in future videos. Originally, I would have given this movie a solid 7.5 out of 10, or maybe even just a little bit more, maybe 7.7, 7.8 or something. But I'm going to lower it to a 7 at most due to how the trilogy as a whole handles the storyline setup in this film. I could lower it even more because of what happens in the other movies, but I'm hesitant to knock it down too far for the mistakes of other movies. So all in all, a pretty solid and enjoyable movie. It just sucks what ended up happening with the rest of the trilogy. So that is going to be it for The Force Awakens. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on the movie, and I would love to hear what you think about it down in the comments below. Remember, this is just my opinion, and if you have a different one, I would love to hear it because it is important to respect and hear others' opinions, even if they differ from your own. Now, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos. The next one, I will be discussing The Last Jedi, and let me just say, I think it's going to be a juicy one. Anyways, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out the video. I hope you decide to stick around, and I'll be seeing you all soon. Have a great rest of your day, and may the Force be with you.